Well, it seems like yesterday when I asked you as a congregation to give me ideas of what we could speak about at the pulpit. And this entire summer series has come from you. Today, it's about God Winks, Squire Rushnell book that a very good friend of mine got me and said, you need to read this. And so I did. And then it just so happened that it came in as a request. Could we talk about God Winks and those moments in time? And I thought, what an interesting sermon topic. So we could do that. But I'm going to make you come up and talk also. So when Michelle Howgeetson joins me in a few minutes, just remember I didn't tell you who it was who suggested God Winks, but you'll figure it out. Anyway, the peace of Christ be with you always. You and I have supreme confidence that God is bringing about every detail of our lives to accomplish His purposes of glory to Him and good to us. We can trust that. You can trust Him. Warning though, this doesn't mean that everything that comes easy in life is an open door from God. Adrian Rogers said, men worry about time, but God's only concerns Himself with the timing. I think that's really true. Squire Rushnell is a former television producer for ABC. He was a key player in the rise of Good Morning America. Maybe some of you remember Schoolhouse Rock and ABC's after-school specials, which I adored, and so did my children. After 9/11, he changed the direction of his life. He began collecting stories about what some would call coincidences, which he calls God's wink. This obsession resulted in books, videos, and a website. Rushnell and his wife, comedian Louise Duarte, also tour the company promoting prayer for couples. But Squire pays particular attention to coincidence and that are statistically unlike a normal coincidence. He sees them as God winking at us and letting us know that He is aware and that He's thinking about us. We don't have to believe the divine origin of all the stories to believe that God is there and that He cares, but whether you call it a luck, maybe a twist of fate, God winks is peppered through our lives. And when we get close enough in our faith journey, we start to recognize and appreciate as our eyes are opened more fully. We can keep our eyes open for those God winks in our life. Let me tell you a quick story. Baltimore Oriole coach Earl Weaver. Now, ladies, Baltimore Oriole is a baseball team back when it was in Baltimore. And Earl Weaver was a renowned coach. And he had a rule that no one could steal a base unless he was given the steal base sign. Well, Reggie Jackson played for Earl Weaver. And Reggie Jackson was upset that the coach would tell him when it was time to steal. For those of you who aren't in knowledge or need to be reminded, Reggie Jackson was one of our greatest ball players and stole more bases. I don't even know if his record's been broken yet. But he felt he could judge, and he felt he could do the time when it was necessary to steal. So one game he decided to steal without the sign. He got a good jump off the pitcher and easily beat the throw to second. He was safe. As he shook the dirt off from his uniform, Jackson smiled with delight. Feeling he was vindicated, my judgment was good for the manager, he thought to himself. But later after the game, Coach Weaver took Jackson aside and explained why he hadn't given that steal sign. First, the next batter was Lee May, his best power hitter other than Jackson. So when Jackson stole from first to second, first base was left open. So what did the other team do? Thought defensively and walked May. So there you go. You would think, okay, well, that's not bad. We have someone on second, someone on first. Second, the following batter hadn't been strong against the pitcher. So Weaver felt he had to send up a pitch hitter to try to drive in the men on base. That left Weaver without bench strength later in the game when he needed it. Here was the problem. Jackson only saw his relationship to the pitcher and to the catcher. But Weaver, the coach, was looking at the big picture. He was looking at the whole game. Well, we too have eyes like that. We can only see so far, but God always sees the bigger picture. When he sends us a signal, it's pretty wise to obey, no matter what we may think we know. And it may be a long time later that we recognize a God wink, maybe even years later. It was Wednesday night in Beatrice, Nebraska. Just like our church, it was custom on Wednesday evenings that the Westside Baptist Church was holding choir practice. Usually the good, faithful choir members would arrive long before the 7:30 starting time. But on the evening of March 1st, 1950, one by one, two by two, they all had excuses for being late. Marilyn, the church pianist, overslept after her after-dinner nap, so she and her mother were late. One girl, a high school sophomore, had trouble with her homework. That delayed her. She was late. One couple couldn't get their car started. They were supposed to pick up another couple, so all four of them were late. All 18 members of the choir, plus the pastor and his wife, were late that evening. And all of them had good but very different excuses. Right at the dot of 7:30, the time the choir practice usually began, there wasn't a soul in the choir loft, let alone yet the church. But that night, the only night in the history of the church that the choir was not starting its practice at 7:30, was the night that there was a gas leak in the basement of the church. And exactly at 7:30, the church blew to pieces. The furnace room had been right under the choir loft. Doesn't the Lord work in mysterious ways? That night in Beatrice, it was through homework assignments, stalled cars, after-dinner naps, that an entire choir and its pastor and wife were saved. God is and always has been in control. So as you sit here today, if you totaled up the number of times you were just about to take a step off a curb and were distracted by something, and then you found yourself standing in front of a fast-moving car, that happened to us in Dublin, when that small voice deep within, just in the nick of time, stopped you from taking that step. Maybe there's other incidences just in the nick of time. I would suspect you'd be amazed. Maybe you'd call it instinct. I call it the small, still voice of God. So, what do you think about this? In times of uncertainty, when we desire more than anything else is certainty, Certainty that our families are safe. Certainty that we won't be downsized in our jobs, that we'll have enough in our paycheck to make it through the month. We crave certainty when we get a scary medical report, and we long for certainty in our relationships. It's during times, though, of uncertainty that we especially need to connect with our faith. We need to believe that our lives are not random like those twigs floating on a stream to destinations unknown. No, instead, we need to know that we have a greater purpose, that someone really is up there watching over us. And we're always on His incredible GPS, which I call God's positioning system. Never alone. To me, the best thing about God winks is that they are tangible signposts along our way, giving us hope and replacing uncertainty with a genuine feeling that everything is going to be okay. I think, Michelle, you have a God wink moment or two that you would like to share. Would you please join me up here?
My first God wink came in the form of Brian Delbridge, former principal of Central School in Owasso, Michigan. The time was late August 1973. I had graduated from college in the spring and had not secured a teaching job, although I had interviewed with Brian in New Lothrop. I had been passed over for someone with more experience. I had decided to stay in Kalamazoo and work in a blood lab in a hospital. Oh, to be 22, I am scared to death of blood and needles. However, back to the story. I had driven to my hometown, Grass Lake, one day to visit my mom. There were no cell phones, no texts in that day to let her know I was coming. As I walked up the back steps to her house, I could see through the kitchen window that she was on the phone with someone. She was saying, "No, I don't know where Michelle is. Wait a minute, she is here right now." I took the phone, and it was Brian Delbridge. He had moved in late August from New Lothrop to Owasso and taken a job at Central School as principal. He needed a 6th grade teacher. He did not remember my name, but remembered my size. So he called the secretary in New Lothrop and described me to her. He received my mom's number and called her. I happened to be walking up the steps of my mom's house at the very minute Brian was calling. I took the phone and said hello. Brian asked, "Do you want to come to Owasso to teach 6th grade here?" Absolutely, I did. I moved here by finding Owasso on a map. I met my future husband, we married, and had our son. I have lived here for 42 years and have been teaching all this time. This is my home. I did not know it was a God wink then, but I certainly do now. I am eternally grateful for the God wink in my life.
You know, there are no coincidences. We call them God incidences, or as Squire calls them, God winks. I have many God wink in my life. Some of you, I apologize if you've heard this story 1,000 times, but here it goes again. So, it's a beautiful first weekend in December. And Advent's going strong, and I've been really tired, but we've had concert after concert after concert, and it's just been really busy here at the church. So I don't think anything of it. But I wake up on a Saturday morning, and I just have this like little tug on my side. So I thought, I'll go to the free clinic this morning at Redeemer. Now, most of you know Redeemer was my home church, so I feel very comfortable there. I walk in, and Dr. Dave Huff, who is another member, hi Deb, blah, 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 okay. And then this young man, Billy Workman, who I have known since he's this big, who I was his youth leader, says, Mrs. Grazier, how are you? And I said, Billy, I've just got this pain on my side. And he says, oh, well, Dr. Huff will take care of it. Of course, Dr. Huff will take care of it. I go into Dr. Huff, and he goes, oh, it's not a thing. Don't worry about it. Okay, not a thing. He didn't even touch it. Not a thing. I walk out, and Billy Workman says, Mrs. Grazier, don't you love that? The children, I mean, he's 26 years old at that point. He's studying to be a doctor. He's just about there. Mrs. Grazier. Mrs. Grazier, what Dave say? I said, he says it's nothing. Don't worry about it. He goes, we're going to have 2 more doctors in about another hour. Could you come back? I thought, I got Christmas shopping to do. I've got all sorts of stuff. I only have a little bit of time. I don't know. I went home, and Bud had breakfast ready. And we're eating breakfast, and he goes, I told you there was nothing wrong. I don't know why you run to that free clinic. And I go, I don't know. I just felt like something was wrong. And he goes, Billy Workman asked me to come back. And he goes, well, we're either going to go to the mall or you can go back. Well, you know what that means when a husband says that. You better choose going to the mall, or you're not going to get a chance to do it. And so we're having breakfast, and it just keeps nagging at me. Mrs. Grazier. Mrs. Grazier. So I go back, and as I'm waiting for the other 2 doctors at the free clinic, Billy says, you know what, could you just go in the sanctuary and lie on the pew? Can I just feel your abdomen? Yeah, okay. And he's touching, and he says, Mrs. Grazier, he said, I think your spleen's enlarged. Huh. Okay. He goes out. He goes and gets the other 2 doctors. One was Dr. Wegman, who is a, what is he, Bonnie?
He's a dermatologist.
Dermatologist. Nothing to do with my side. I forget who the other doctor was. But Dr. Huff doesn't come in. These other 2 come in the sanctuary, and they're feeling my side, and they went, yep. And the spleen is definitely enlarged. Oh, maybe the liver's a little enlarged, too. Wait here. Before I know it, they're sending me up to ER. I'm calling Bud, and I'm going, they just want me to go up for a CAT scan. So okay. Okay. So I go up and I get my CAT scan, and don't think anything of it, and Bud is really a good guy, and we do go. We go shopping. And we're at Toys R Us, and it's now about 3:30 in the afternoon, and I had left the hospital at 1:30. 3:30 in the afternoon, and Bud's cell phone rings. Is this Mr. Grazier? Is your wife with you? Yes. She needs to come right back up to the hospital. Oh. So we leave Toys R Us. We go back up to the hospital. Now they want to do an ultrasound, and they want to do some other testing. And by 6:30 that night, this is still the same Saturday, Dr. Huff was calling me at home saying, Debbie, we think it's non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, but we won't know until you see a cancer doctor. What? No. I just have a little pain in my side. That's all. Just a little pain in my side. Well, here I am, no insurance, somebody telling me that I have non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, cancer. But they're not sure, but they're sure. Dr. Huff said, you know what? Tomorrow is Doctor Appreciation Day. And they have a big reception with all the doctors. I'm going to see if I can't get you into a cancer doctor. Sunday evening, he called, you see Dr. Mahmood tomorrow. Be there at the Owasso Cancer Center. Boom, 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 boom. Dr. Mahmood says we have to do all sorts of testing. We want to do this. I want to biopsy that. I want to do this. Nothing, nothing, nothing. 2 weeks, 3 weeks go. Christmas Eve, the day before Christmas Eve, I have a bone marrow biopsy. And it finally says what Billy Workman said. And they find that I have non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in the bone marrow. I have what I feel is the best cancer doctor in the city, let alone I'll put her up to anybody in the state. It just happened to be a young man who wouldn't take the older doctor's advice, who kept insisting that I come back. I saw God wink after God wink after God wink, everything falling into place. From Dr. Mahmood saying, by the way, I've set you up with a surgeon. You have to see him Wednesday. This was a Monday. And they're going to put a port in because you're going to want a port for chemo. Okay. Blah, 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 blah. Again, many God wink incidents. Then, as I am dealing with the news of cancer and I'm sharing it with all of you, and I'm going to school to be a pastor, somehow that just is enough that God's saying, I've got bigger plans for you, kiddo. You can think that you might be dying. You can think that you've only got a few years, but I've got bigger plans for you. And I just kept going to school and going to school and going to school because of your generosity and your faith and your thoughtfulness. God winks again. Lo and behold, from whatever the circumstances be, our pastor leaves. And there we go. I'd like to say it was definitely a God wink that spoke to all of you to call me on that January day in 2013 and offer me the senior pastor position through the United Church of Christ, even before I had been installed with a conference. Another God wink. God there the whole time. How many of you have stories like that? Personal. I look at Louise. I don't want to embarrass you. I look at some of the struggles she's had in the past year with her health. She's got a granddaughter that only had to look at her a few times, and that granddaughter fought for every decision that was being made in that hospital. No, I want you to do this. No, I want you to do that. Don't you think God uses us in such a powerful way? But that God wink is still there. It's still there in our lives. This is a touching story, and I think that most of you will be able to understand when I read it why it's touching. Uncertainty was pressing on Ken Gobb. Self-pity surrounded him. "What do you want with me, Lord?" he silently demanded as his family's 2 Silver Eagle motor coaches traveled along I-75 somewhere around Dayton, Ohio. Ken's 2 sons were driving, keeping in touch with a CB radio. The rest of the family members were snoozing, reading, or lost in their own thoughts. "Let's make a stop at this exit," said one of the backseat people. Well, the Gobb family was a traveling ministry covering 50,000 miles a year, taking their family entertainment act into churches and schools, back into rural America. Ken was feeling tired and unsatisfied. "Where am I, Lord?" he asked. "Couldn't we serve you better by staying put? Making our lives and having a more secured income somewhere?" they pulled into the gas station, and he told the family, go ahead, go use the restrooms, go get your coffee, go do whatever. I'm just going to stretch my legs for a while. And as he's walking around the gas station, he hears that empty phone booth ringing. No one's around. This is when we still had phone booths. Try and find one now. And it's ringing, and he finally goes over and he picks it up. What if it's for the gas station attendant? He thought, maybe it's an emergency. Hello? I have a person-to-person call for a Mr. Ken Gobb, said the operator. What? Ken said instinctively, furrowing his brow and looking around for the candid camera. Somebody, this has got to be a joke. Calling Ken Gobb, repeated the operator. You're crazy, he repeated. Still looking around for that hidden camera. I have a person-to-person call for him. I believe, is that you, sir? Now, Ken was really curious. If this were a setup, they were really doing a good job. Go ahead, said the operator. Mr. Gosh, I saw you on the TV show The 700 Club, said the woman with a quick nervousness. I'm Millie. I'm here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Remember, they're on I-75 in Ohio. And I remembered your name and something about a letter that I was writing. Actually, Mr. Gobb, it was a suicide note. And then the woman began to cry. Ken was very puzzled. You don't know me, she said. I'm desperate. I remembered you, and I remembered the phone number that came into my mind to call you. Thank you so much for taking my call. This wasn't a joke. How did you get my number? He asked. I don't know, it just came into my mind while I was writing. I've got you in your office, right? He goes, no. Millie, you called me, and I'm in a phone booth on I-75 in the middle of the country. Could I talk with you now, though, Mr. Gobb? Of course you can, Millie. Saying goodbye after the conversation ended, Ken took a seat on the stone wall by the gas station. For several moments, he contemplated the power of the God wink that he and Millie had just experienced. Was this a message of hope for her, or a message of hope for him? Across the asphalt driveway, he saw his wife and the others emerging from the diner and the gas station. Hey, Barb, he shouted. Hey, God knows where I am. Of course. So many times over the years, Ken Gobb has revisited that personal, life-changing God wink. Time after time, he reflected. Still will never get the sound of the voice. Hi, I'm Millie. And as I was writing a suicide note, I decided to call you. Funny how God uses time and people and situations to get our attention. Open our eyes that I might see. Are our eyes opened? Have we caught a God wink and maybe not felt it or not seen it? If you want to be certain that God is in your life, take time to look at your past. Uncover those prior God wink moments. The ones that you shrugged off and you just said, oh man, was I lucky today. Oh man. And you may discover that God has been winking and involved with you your whole life. Matthew 13:35 says, I will use stories to speak my message and to explain things that I have been hidden since the creation of the world. So what about you? How often have some coincidence led to a fork in the road for you career-wise, spiritual life, whatever it is? You know, this is not to say that God dictates every detail of our lives. That's why we have free will. But don't you really think about how many incidences were completely directed by His power, by His hand, by His love, by His mercy? He promises us in Romans 8:28 and 29, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. For those God foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the image of His Son, that He might be the firstborn among His brothers and sisters. What's God doing in your life right now? Even if you're currently struggling, and especially if you're struggling, expect a few God winks just in the nick of time. And when they arrive, give God all the glory and honor that He deserves. There's a song that was written by Babby Mason, and the line says, "When you can't trace His hand, trust His heart." Look for those God winks in your life. Amen.